Welcome, friends and Lead 24/7 alumni, and anybody else that might watch this special Zoomcast today. And this is a special one. We normally invite people to share their stories. People I find especially interesting. All people are interesting when you hear their stories, but there's some people that are especially interesting. And we did that normal kind of Zoomcast with our guest a while ago. And as he shared his story about how he came to be who he is and do what he does, I realized if he would be willing, it would be great if he would share his research with us. So that's what this special Zoomcast is about today. And so I've invited back Dr. Ron Bonnstetter. And Ron is the Senior Vice President of Research and Development at Target Training International. And those of you that have gone through our Lead 24/7 program know that we use assessments from TTI. He is Professor Emeritus from the University of Nebraska in education and educating educators. And he even received, was the first recipient of a prestigious award for the way he would educate teachers. He has given speeches in all 50 states and in 17 countries. So I just feel really privileged that he would share what he often shares there, that he's going to share with us today. He was the 2012 Edison Award winner, and he's been featured in many publications, including Harvard Business Review. Today, he's going to share the information that he's learned so much and so many people are interested in about the brain and about behavior, and I think you'll find it very fascinating. So welcome, Ron. So glad that you're with us once again.
Well, I just appreciate the opportunity. So I do have some slides that I'd like to go through. Yeah. And don't hesitate to interject or to ask questions. You know, sometimes we don't know what other people are necessarily hearing or not hearing. And so, you know, this stuff is, I live with it. And sometimes I go right over the head of somebody thinking, well, that made perfect sense to me.
I'll try to do a good job. If you use some TLAs, we don't know, which is three-letter acronyms. So
we'll work on that. So let me share my screen for a moment and see if we can come up with some interesting things. I think this title sort of sums it up in terms of the science of self, and we're going to look at the role of emotions, and I'm going to be able to show some brain images that really dictate and show the role of emotions in decision making might be the way to do it. You know, when I think about research, most people think that somebody's going to tell you about research and they somehow separate themselves from that research. And I want you to really realize today that that's not the case with what we're wanting to do. I want this research to touch you. I want you to give serious thought to the implications of what I have to say in your lived life. And if we could tie that together, I think I will have accomplished part of my goal. Yes, I think the research in itself is fascinating, but it really takes on a life of its own when we start thinking about it on a daily basis and reflecting on some of the things I'm going to share. So with that in mind, I want to start with just backing up for a moment where this started. As Rodger pointed out, I was in teacher education and I prepared science teachers. And along the way, I discovered, without going into detail, I discovered that first of all, my students didn't really understand self. And more importantly, I didn't understand myself. And so I started using assessments that were luckily part of the family, with my brother having a set of assessments that he was kind enough to allow me to use in education. And as a result of that, I started to get some notoriety in terms of people recognizing that, you know, there's some things going on different here in this program. I ended up getting an national award from the National Science Teachers Association, went to Washington where Carl Sagan gave me an award for this outstanding teacher preparation program in the nation. And I had my wife in the front row and she took a picture of the two of us so that I have documentation that it happened. And my wife's an artist, but not necessarily a very good photographer.
You know,
So then,
you two look kind of similar, I'd say.
he was a little thinner and taller. At any rate, I came back to the university, and of course, we need to also recognize that not everybody celebrates other people's success. They may outwardly, but a lot of times they don't necessarily mean it. So actually, sort of reluctantly, the dean asked me to do a presentation to the faculty when I came back. So I did this presentation, and in the process of explaining how I used assessments, the interesting part was that he stood up and said, "We do not use tarot cards for decision making." Well, the fact is, self-reports are suspect. And so that day, I sort of refocused my research because, in fact, I wanted to prove that something I felt could be scientifically proven. And so I really have spent almost 30 years working on how decisions are made, and can we actually document that something we put down is, in fact, has some validity and some reliability. With that in mind, when I came down here, I had the chance to really open my own lab. And here we see a picture of what goes on, and what I'm going to be showing you today, reflect back on this picture, because this is exactly what happens. Somebody has a neural net on, and they are having their brain scanned in real time. I'm able to see in real time images as well as quantitative data as to what's going through their head. And that gets sort of exciting.
Yeah.
Actually, what I see on the screen, I think sort of freaks other people out. I get excited about this picture. This is like a masterpiece to me, because I get to see all the images of the different wavelengths in the brain. I get to see the quantitative microvoltage that's taking place in each area of the brain. And we look at the prefrontal cortex, we look at the temporals, and we collect all this data that's going through your executive functions. If I look at the raw data, it's something like this. So you just get an EEG, electroencephalograph, and all I have is 19 electrodes that are showing good stuff. And down at the bottom, you see these little spikes. I'm able to tell when something comes on the screen that I want to see your reaction to, and when it goes off the screen. We then take those bands, these green bands would represent when you're seeing something on the screen that I want to see how your brain reacted to it. We analyze each of those areas. And now there are two patents that have come out of this process. And without going into a lot of detail, what I'm going to do is show you what happens when I'm able to analyze those green areas of your brain. And I'm going to show you some images in a general manner, what I find. For example, I can see when you disagree with something on the screen. This would be called an aversion. And when you see an aversion, I get this flash of gamma activity, which is a high frequency wave. And I get that red part is where you're getting that gamma ray. And now what we see here is that gamma is taking place on the right side of the brain. In other words, the eyes are looking at you. And so that right side of the brain is flaring with gamma. And that is an immediate reaction, and primarily an emotional reaction to that concept. And it's aversion. It's on the right side of the brain. Now, what happens if I have my poker face on and I'm just really not necessarily stimulated by the concept on the screen? I get sort of a neutral reaction across the two lobes in the front of the brain. And then this is the cool one. So we come along and we like something, and guess what? It's on the left side of the brain. So right, left, neutral. And it's really that fast. And in fact, if I had this on Rodger right now, I could see whether he's agreeing with me or disagreeing. We get this whole range then of level of agreement, from enthusiastic, to really rejection, that take place in that move then from the left to the right or the right to the left. And so we're able to then start, it's almost like a lie detector in some ways, but it's showing you an immediate reaction. With that in mind, I want to show you just a few examples. For example, we always sneak this one in, and I think this is because of my last name being Bonnstetter. And I was an academic, and so academics care about publications probably more than they should. And at any rate, if somebody were to quote me and put in one N, I feel a rejection. There's an emotional response that occurs as soon as I read that article and see that my name's spelled wrong. Mm. And so for the fun of it, I wanted to see if other people respond that way. And sure enough, when you see a person's name spelled correctly, it's a left hemisphere flare. Everybody's happy. And then when it's spelled wrong, it moves to the right. And it's just sort of cool to get that affirmation when people are taking the little assessment that, yeah, this must be working. I want to show you one of the experiments we did early on that led to an insight that's going to direct some of what I say today and about each of us. And that is, we ran an experiment on behaviors. So one of the cells in our behavior assessment asked you to rank order from 1 to 4 some items. Here's the answer that a person gave on a set of 4. They said they were most bold and daring, all the way down to careful and calculated. And then we get their brain scanned while they're making that answer, while they're making that choice. And here's what the brain looks like. Sure enough, there's a little bit across both, but the dominance is on the left side for agreement. And by the way, I can just look at the brain scans and I can match your first choice to your assessment with about an 84% accuracy. So then I really get a 50-50 in these two. I'm not very accurate with these two. And again, they're just sort of in the middle. So your brain is not giving me a great response. Here's the fun one. When you tell me what you dislike, it is just a flare on that right side. And all of a sudden, no, that's not me. And so this becomes a really interesting way to see if our assessments are being answered accurately, if I can actually look at sort of your precognition. I'm actually looking at 200ths of a second and gathering what your brain is saying about an answer before you've had a cognitive thought. So you don't have a cognitive thought until about a 30th.
Would you say that again? Would you say that in different words? I want to make sure everybody hears this.
Well, as we're making decisions, you have to have a cognitive thought. You have to really, ruminate on the process.
Yep.
And that rumination, in terms of a decision that you're aware of, takes a third of a second. However, your brain does it faster than your awareness. This response is at 200ths of a second.
That's fascinating and scary at the same time.
Well, I'll tell you, it is scary, and we're going to get into more of this because, believe it or not, the research indicates as much as 95% of the time that initial response for which you are not even aware becomes your final answer.
Wow.
Becomes your final answer.
Wow.
So keep that in mind. And in terms of our assessments, we now recognize that what you say you're not is actually the strongest reaction. So here's just a little tidbit in terms of how I use this in our business, that the natural style in our behavior DISC assessment always comes from 3 and 4, because you're telling us the truth. You're telling us who you really are. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, social science and neurology, I find it fascinating to start merging mindsets in different fields. I think that's where the value of research comes, is when you start to see the interconnectivity. And this is a paper that John wrote in 2001. And this is an awesome paper, but it comes from social science. In other words, he's doing observations of people to come up with this. And here's what he says. He says in this paper that you have an eliciting situation. I call that a trigger in the neurology world.
Okay.
So this eliciting situation leads to an intuition. I call that an emotion. And he said that then results in a judgment. What? And then you rationalize what you already decided.
Boy, I know a bunch of my engineering friends are not going to like this at all. I completely agree with it, Ron, and have believed this for many, many years, even before the research is kind of proving it. But Boy, we rational engineers that, think of ourselves a little like Dr. Spock. We don't like this. Anyway, keep going.
Well, yeah, and I'll tell you, you could almost stop at this point and say that you got your money's worth, because if you start to realize that we spend a lot of our time rationalizing and justifying what we've already decided at an emotional level, that does become very insightful and very useful tool. Now, here's what you can do to get around that. You literally need to move so that you have reasoning and logic before the judgment. That can only happen, in other words, we believe rather than believe what we see. We see what we want to believe. And this is so crucial in science, because many times scientists are guilty of looking for confirmation rather than the true data.
Right.
Data that doesn't fit doesn't get as much attention to us. And Richard Feynman is one of my heroes. Just a little quick sidebar. When he was asked to describe some of those moments in his research life that were sort of eureka moments, he said, I never did get excited about your eureka moments. That meant that I thought I was going to find something and I found it. He said, what excited me is when I had an experiment and I ended up saying to myself, that's funny. And I think if we start to realize that we are missing out on some richness by not stopping and saying, that doesn't fit what I really thought it would, I'd better pay attention to that. Could be interesting.
Yeah.
I'll come back to this though. So definitely, if we can do 3 R's, if we can refrain, reflect, and then respond. And so, you see some people that are really good at this. You pose a difficult, interesting question in a conversation, and they use what's called wait time. And they sort of think about it before they just pop off. And I think most of us probably are guilty of not doing enough of this refraining, reflecting, and responding. We could work on that.
Amen.
I want to talk a little bit about team dynamics now with regard to this emotional component that's going on. So in a team setting, the first thing is to be aware that you have potentially a multitude of brain activity that might look like this. You might have some people that are in total agreement. That would be that left hemisphere flare. Yes, I'm a team member and we're here going together and everybody's happy. We might have people that are engaged, but they're not verbal, they're not expressive, they're not over the top, let's say. Then you might have some people that are disengaged. And they're there, but mentally they're really not there. They're thinking about other things, that are flying through your mind. You might have some people that are conflicted about this and actually disagreeing with what's going on. And you may have some people that are actually overreacting. I think the common term right now that's being used inappropriately probably are those 4 people named Karen. So we have some people that might be overreacting, and maybe they realize they need to stop and think, oh, wow, that's what my brain's looking like right now, and maybe I ought to work on that.
So when I look at that, I would have thought it's like, no, I have 2 things going on. I agree and I disagree at the same time, but that's not what you're saying, is it?
Well, what you have here is, yes, you actually do have agreeing and disagreeing going on, because there's part of you that actually does know that there is value in some of this, but you're overreacting. And this brain image actually shows that you have movement back into the temporal. That's where the emotions are coming from.
Okay.
So when you start to see the side of this image lighting up, you're getting heavy emotion associated with the decision.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, as soon as this happens, there are a number of other things that take place, Rodger. We end up having cortisol flooding the brain and adrenaline flooding the brain. So we have a chemical reaction as well as a neurological reaction. And as a result, the prefrontal cortex shuts down.
Yeah.
In other words, logical thinking shuts down. We are in a react mode. Our reptilian brain takes over.
Yeah.
And literally we just react.
Yeah. And our alums of Lead 24/7 will recognize from living systems theory that we talk about you can't do both at the same time. And we like this expression I got from Trisha Taylor that anxiety makes us stupid.
Yes,
And,
it really does.
so this is visualization of that.
Yeah, that's fun stuff. Okay, now social influence of human decision making. I'm going to go back to the Hyatt paper for just a moment because I actually only showed you half of that graphic a moment ago. Here's the full graphic. And the article goes on to point out that not only do you make a judgment before you actually have the information, but when you're in a group, you take their reactions into consideration before you make a decision. You know, and we've seen some things in recent months where groupthink is different than what the individual might have done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you have to realize the influence others are having on you as well. Isn't that fascinating?
It is. It is. And this is what we would call it when people manage this well, which is rare, but when they manage it well, we would call that emotionally mature.
Yes, we would. All right. This is just for the fun of it. I'm going to show these very quickly. Tom Kohler and I had the privilege of writing an article in Clinical EEG. And this is one of the parts of that paper where we're really right now trying to figure out how people make decisions. So I want to show you that, in fact, we have decided we've been able to create a 4x4, 16-cell decision-making pathways that you can move through, all the way from non-reaction up here in this corner to a full left hemisphere flare where we're happy, 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 approach, good. Then we have this dislike over here in this corner with the right hemisphere flare, and then, of course, the emotional flare, which is overactivation. Now, what's interesting is when I apply that to one of our researchers, so we have all these cells that are identified as to what might be described as your brain, and we can fill in the holes. I'm going to show you the reaction of a person. Each of these images are 1/8 of a second. So they're a sequence. Up on the screen comes, I can calm myself in tense situations. And by the way, they gave that a 5 out of a 6. So they agreed that I can calm myself in situations. But let's look what happens to the brain as they see this an 1/8 of a second through this series. So the first thing is, yes, feeling bad, mixed feeling. Then we go, not activated, not activated. Then we go over here to this mixed feeling again, not activated. And then we go over to bad. It's the rejection, it's disagreement, it's disagreement, it's disagreement. And then we're back to non-active, not active. And here's the bottom line, folks. They said they agreed with this, but yet 5 times in there, they disagreed with it in their mind. This item is what we call a socially acceptable response in the brain. In other words, it may not be a good question because it looks like people know the right answer.
Okay.
I can calm myself in tense situations. They actually said, yes, they can. And their brain said, that time I didn't. Oh, that time I didn't. So it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
And as a result, we're making questions that are harder because we want people to, give a response that is more accurate. Mm-hmm. I want to show you, for the fun of it, something that I had done because I am a high D, which, as my brother said, is an explanation, not an excuse. So we'll keep that in mind as you look at this. So for the fun of it, I'm sitting there with the lab and I can actually look at brain activity. So I actually hooked up with linked ears and what's called CZ, which is just a point right square on the top of your head. It's a montage setting where it's what's classified as CZ. So at any rate, I set up an electrode there to see what my brain's doing. And I intentionally trigger myself with something that is on my mind that is upsetting. And I want to show you what happens when I trigger my brain and think about something upsetting. Look at that gamma start to grow and grows. And then I try to calm myself. And I'll tell you, this calming takes 32 seconds for me to calm. And I'm sitting there all alone,
Yeah.
just trying to get rid of that emotion that was associated with that concept. Slowly it goes away, but it's total concentration. And the best I can do is 32 seconds.
Wow.
There, I finally get back to my cure. Isn't that fascinating?
That is, and I don't want to slow you down too much, but are there some specific techniques you're using to calm yourself?
Yes. Interesting that some of the easiest ones is just concentrating on your breathing.
Okay.
And literally breathe in and out and count to 9. 9 is a magic number because it's an odd number. And so when you get to 9, you have to actually switch on breathing in and breathing out or rotate it. In other words, the brain actually, we cannot multitask. And when you focus on your brain, on your breathing, what you're literally doing is removing that stimuli, and your brain really can't work on it anymore.
Yeah.
Because you're focusing on something else.
Makes a ton of sense. So if you can think about something, it causes emotion to come down because you can't do both at the same time.
That's correct. Yeah. And it's a misnomer for people to say that you can multitask higher function. Yes, you can ride a bicycle and chew gum, but higher functional thinking can only really be focused on one thing at a time when it comes to that executive function. Now, what's also interesting, and only because of my age, I have no reflection on you whatsoever, but at any rate, as we get older, we're less able to do this because we think we're multitasking, and what we're really doing is switch tasking. And as we get older, it's harder to switch between tasks.
Yeah. Answering
the phone, writing the text, driving the car, all of those things become much, much more difficult to switch between with age. Okay? For whatever that's worth.
It's very helpful. It's very helpful. And I try to let my wife know I'm especially this way. It's like, I can listen, but I can't switch real quick. So the first few things you said, I may not have heard at all.
Yeah. Decision making is just something we need to focus on. I think too many of us are puppets to our brain. And our brain is really controlling things in ways that, we're not aware of. And so I'm hoping today that I've given you an opportunity to start thinking about awareness of how decisions are made. The fact that there is this is an important concept. There is an emotional component to every decision you make.
Yeah.
Now, it may be a very, very weak emotional response, or it could be either end of those spectrums. But there is still in the brain, the processing starts with that emotion, and then the processing occurs. So it really becomes crucial. Without self-awareness, folks, and our assessments, I think, open the door to new personal insights. So we just have to be aware of that. But here's what's fun about this. If we seriously give some thought to this, and by the way, thinking can hurt. So these things hurt. We could start to better understand where beliefs come from. You see, we don't always know why we believe what we believe.
Yeah.
We rationalize, we justify, but do we really know why we believe it? We have prejudice, all of us to some extent. Where do they come from?
Yeah.
How did we get them? We have hidden triggers that sometimes come out and we don't even know where they came from. And we have implicit memories. And I'll tell you, this is at the core of what I'm talking about. You see, because implicit memories are really that precognition. Implicit memories you're not even aware of. You know, it's there, but you don't know where it came from. It's in your past. And they crop up and they influence decisions. We've already talked about the emotional triggers. the subconscious thoughts, the precognitions, personal biases that occur, and our values are all tied to our decision making.
So Ron, I want to ask a question. I've heard a lot about how much the brain becomes the brain from 0 to 3 or 0 to 5 years old. Are these kinds of things you're talking about here? Do you suspect many of them formed before I was really conscious?
Well,
I don't know where they came from.
Yeah, in some cases, even pre-birth,
Okay.
we're seeing some components that can occur both chemically and emotionally in that setting, picking up the mother's anxieties and stress, as well as some chemical reactions, okay, doing some things they shouldn't. For example, I'll give you one example. If you are not exposed to another language and you only have your native tongue, by the age of 18, some of the unique sounds associated with other languages you don't even hear. Therefore, you can't express them verbally. And so we hear that uniqueness in some cultures when somebody comes and starts to speak English, but they have this accent that just looks like certain letters have been removed from the alphabet.
Yeah.
They're gone. And the brain has said, okay, we don't need that neuron anymore. And so we're going to reprocess it and have it do something else.
Okay.
Now, but I want to point out that your question is exciting from my point of view. 20 years ago, this conversation you and I are having would be very different. I would be very black and white and dogmatic and say, you know, if you don't use it, you lose it. And once it's gone, it's gone. That's no longer true. We are learning that the brain is so plastic in ways that we never realized. Now, that doesn't mean that it automatically just rebuilds and everybody's hunky-dory. It takes work, but it can be done. Yeah. We literally can rebuild pathways.
And it's hard work, right? Like someone coming back from a stroke can use a different part of the brain to learn to do these things, but man, I hear it's really hard work.
Yeah. But that's exciting news. It's not a door. I have one more that's sort of fun. I was doing a presentation with a group of psychologists in Georgia a number of years ago. And we had a beautiful conversation. It started with, you know, language is so important and precise language. And I used the word subconscious, and somebody stopped me and said, subconscious means it's there and you're just not fully aware of it. I think you're talking more about a precognition. Yes, I am. They just had to get that. And then I used this word, free will, and I lost the presentation.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of debate going on right now about this because so much happens before we even are aware.
Yes, and actually that's both and very depressing.
Yeah,
that are we really puppets? And if we force ourselves to be different, are we simply buying into a different puppet?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
We can go pretty deep down this rabbit hole, but I won't take you any further. So
yeah.
But so I might have questions for you. Is this your last slide?
Well, I think, you know what? No, let me do one more thing for the fun.
We have another 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, let me tell you some things that I'm doing with Dustin Hibbets and I. He's a colleague down here working with me, and he has spent a lifetime studying nonverbals. And so what we have is a picture here of people in different positions, and it's so much fun. I'm just working with him now on some slides where we're literally able to start to look at a person and make some decisions about whether they're a primary DIS and C.
Love that.
Isn't that exciting?
So when we teach about C's, I'll often say this is the salute of a C. Now, sometimes it's because someone's cold, but it's basically me saying, I'm a C, deal with it.
Well, yeah, it means I'm contemplating, I'm not buying into this wholeheartedly. Yep. You know, you're not sucking me in, prove it to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Show me the evidence.
But I had never seen, and this just came from, you know, whatever, but I've never, I love this. I
Well,
love.
I'll tell you, we are aware of many of this. We know when somebody picks up their phone, obviously they're not interested. We
Yeah.
know that some of these gestures are protection and separation and lack of engagement. No, we know that. But there's something exciting about all of this when we can take what we sort of know at a gut level, intuition, and turn it into and give it voice
Yeah.
and lay it out there so we can all see it. So
Yeah.
Dustin's been working on some awesome slides just to put together some stuff where people are mindful. This is a lady that literally has control of her brain like an Olympic star.
Wow.
And this is backing up a little bit on mindset I'll come back to the nonverbals, but just recognize that this is within 3 breaths, she can change her brain. And those are images separating how she controls her brain. You can do it. She says everyone can be trained to do that. Just have to look at it. But now this thing is fun because Dustin is showing that we have to learn and study things about the head, things about the core, and things about the base that all give us information related to how people are thinking.
Mm.
And it's all coming from nonverbals. Isn't that exciting?
Yeah.
And it actually describes in many cases all of these driving forces, motivators, and soft skills. All of that together.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Well, I'll tell you.
So can you give me a story or two of how this has helped change your behaviors, or you've helped some others change behaviors so that the world would be a better place and that we wouldn't just be purely puppets to our emotions?
The first step is, let's go to the neurological and not the nonverbal for a moment. The neurological. I think I am far better at recognizing that when somebody totally disagrees with me and I have no clue how that human being could think that way, that I can process and realize that they are taking in information in an interesting way and they're filtering out some parts. And I am too. And so I'm filtering, they're filtering, and all of a sudden I start to see everybody in a gray rather than a black and white. I'm able to start to see that from their viewpoint, this is just as logical as my viewpoint, but they've processed it differently.
Yeah.
And I have to think, I could be wrong. I mean, I really have to realize that I lay it out like a science. I become a camera looking down on the scenario and realizing that there are different actors playing out different parts, and I can look at it very systematically and logically and objectively.
Your Richard Feynman quote comes to mind in this, that when all of a sudden, and it's a different kind of data than pure science. He's a physicist, but was a physicist. But when all of a sudden someone's not reacting, it's like, rather than know they're wrong and start to judge, it's like, I wonder what's going on. And curiosity. Yeah, I like that.
You know, you just used a word that should have been on our minds throughout a lot of this, and that is judgment. If I had a New Year's resolution that seems to crop up every year, is to be less judgmental and to really focus on why rather than that they're wrong.
Yeah.
And if we could do that, that judgment, suspending judgment and thinking becomes a crucial component.
And I like that you added suspending to it, because as leaders, and you know that our thing is all about leadership, and we do need to judge people. We do need to make good choices around people, but suspending that until we have enough information, until we've gotten maybe enough of our emotions mixed with analysis and rational and our beliefs, reminding ourselves what our beliefs and values are, which is really what I want to be a puppet to, is my beliefs, my good, healthy beliefs and my good, healthy values should drive my life, not my emotions or my disc profile or things like that. But anything else, Ron, that you'd like to share before we wrap this up?
I think the next avenue is to take this information, which really represents for me just a foundation of explanation of decision making, and to move it to the next level so that each of us can be armed with a set of skills that allow us to cope better, to cope with stress, to cope with those things that crop up every day unexpected, and to literally give us some skills that many of us desperately need to be all we can be, that we don't possess right now. The brain is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And I think we need to use it a little more.
Yeah. Well, it is just so fascinating. One of the things that I think in mastering this, if we can make better decisions, which this should help us do, and if we can have better relationships, imagine how much better life would be. Imagine how much better our organizations would be. Imagine how much better the world would be.
Yeah.
And so thank you for your research. Thank you for sharing it with us. I'm going to get as many people to watch this short conversation as I can, because I think you are helping to change the world through the research that you're doing and what you're learning. So thank you so much, Dr. Ron Bonnstetter. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.